Welcome back to the McCann Dogs podcast, episode 26. And I don't know if you're ready for this, but if you have a dog who you feel like doesn't like to listen, if you feel like your dog just isn't listening and you find that to be a struggle, you find that to be a challenge, you just find it frustrating, we're going to talk exactly about exactly what you need to do to get a more motivated dog and why you may have ended up in this situation in the first place. Shannon, this is something that we hear from a lot of people who say, oh, you know, my dog, sometimes he'll listen, but other times he just doesn't want to listen to me. And when we talk about using the McCann method, we talk about ways that we can get the dog to respond the first time you call, every single time. Why do you think people end up mislabeling behaviors like this? What do you think, like the average the average dog owner feels when their dog isn't listening?
Yeah, and I think people go right to human tendencies and human tactics, human learning tactics, and human responsive tactics. For example, you know, with a child, we might use that as a literal statement. You know, she just doesn't want to listen right now, and my brain is very literal. Whenever I always have to process things like this for a moment to make sure that my brain doesn't really go to that exact spot, because it does take things literally. So sometimes it starts to create articles and things like these blog posts before I've even really gotten a handle on what it is. I'll hear a statement and I'll start in my head going through all of the reasons why, well, of course he doesn't want to listen. Our job with the McCann method is to teach him to want to listen, that it's much more valuable to listen to us than it is to follow their own instincts and to be distracted by the other dogs on the street, et cetera. You know, we want to create a situation where we have to teach the dog to want to listen before we can expect that.
I remember when I was first doing my dog training apprenticeship, and I started to see myself, the choices I'd made in a lot of the students that I was working with. And before I came to McCann Dogs, I have Deegan, my black lab, who is still alive. I loved it very much. Is still happy-go-lucky.
17 years old. That is remarkable.
I know. Yeah. But I remember referring to her as stubborn. And I thought, she's really stubborn. You know, labs, they just don't grow out of it until they're 8. Or I made some excuse. I said, you know, whatever. Because at that time, that made sense to me. And what I very quickly discovered helping people with their dogs is that you're either going, when it comes to these behaviors and what expectations you have, you're either going to make excuses or you're going to make changes. And the people that are making excuses will either take a longer time to make some kind of change, or they'll never see a change because they just expect, well, it's a terrier, so I guess I can't teach him to walk on leash. They're all so stubborn. But we are definitely sort of assigning these human behaviors to a pet dog, and that isn't appropriate.
Definitely. And it's normal for people to reach for the easiest answer. And the easiest answer when we're frustrated with a problem is usually what comes out of the environment and what comes out of the people that are surrounding us. But truly, to understand your dog, you really need to look beyond that, because when you get that, you know, well-intentioned advice from people that you know that the dog is, you know, not trainable because he's a terrier, or not trainable because he's more inclined to be stubborn, or you just, you know, got unlucky and got the stubborn puppy in the litter. Yeah. It's not the way it works. I mean, we're all products of our life experience, as are our dogs. Yeah. And if they've never had the experience of enjoying listening to you, and especially if we put them in a situation where they're over their head, they're overfaced with distractions. You know, if you've got a puppy and you go into a situation where there's another puppy, it's going to be very natural for your puppy to want to gravitate towards that puppy because of their life experience previously, the play experience they've had with litter mates. They know that's a good time. You're the one that's new in their life that they're getting used to. So it's really important that we don't expect them to understand skills and be able to respond to commands that we haven't spent the time systematically teaching them that they're valuable to listen to.
I can imagine there might be some listeners at home right now, maybe driving in your car, however you like to enjoy the podcast, thinking like, wow, I mean, they're not talking to me. My dog is stubborn. I have a very stubborn dog. His mother was stubborn. All his litter mates are stubborn. And you are exactly the person we're talking to, because in just a second, I want Shannon to maybe talk about how to, if you feel like you have a stubborn dog, what are the self checks that you need to do? What are some things that you need to be thinking about to make sure that you're giving this dog the best chance possible at being right? Because I don't want you to just fall back on the idea that your dog is stubborn without having put in a little bit of maybe changing some of your tactics first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is all part of the learning process with dogs. You come into it, and of course we're going to rely on our human expectations, and of course that makes our brain go right to this creature is stubborn. Right. And I remember coming up with Quincy, and I remember thinking that, yes, of course she's stubborn. She's a Rottweiler. She's built to be stubborn. She's built to be tough and tenacious. And, she's built to go out there and gather up a huge herd of cows potentially, or guard some sort of thing coming back from market for in times when that was an important part of things for people to make a living and have, money on trails and whatnot, and have a dog that was able to protect. So you needed to have a certain amount of boldness coming out of a dog like that, but that's very different than stubborn. It's not the same thing at all. And basically what we need to do is we need to figure out, we're actually the ones being stubborn if we plant in our heels and say this is the way it is and this is the way the dog's thinking, instead of...
I like looking at it that way. I'd never made that, I never thought that. That's a very good point.
Yeah. Turn that label back to yourself and think, I'm not trying to be stubborn right now. I'm trying to help my dog. So maybe neither of us are being stubborn, and maybe we just need to learn together, and then we can go forward with those processes. So my first rule is always, have I really put in the effort necessary for my dog to be able to listen in this situation? And sometimes that's yes, and sometimes that's no.
Yeah. I think that is really important. And I think that immediately the next connected thought is, well, what have you done? What are the things that you've put effort into? Are those appropriate for the dog?
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about, and I mean, we could really get into the weeds on this, but maybe we can talk a little bit about, what we believe. And so my brain's sort of bouncing around right now around the idea that I've learned a lot in my 20 years as a firefighter, and a lot that's actually helped me with dog training. One is, it's important for me to understand what plan B might be. But what's way more important is that I give plan A a chance to work. I'm thinking, I've been on a light rescue for almost my whole career, and there's been all kinds of situations where we get to this wild and crazy event where we think, okay, we've got to take this person out of this machine or something. And, that's plan A. Plan B is we're going to come in from the top and maybe, remove the machine from the person or whatever. But if we get halfway into plan A and it's not going well, doesn't necessarily mean that I need to change everything. I might just need to make a couple little tweaks, use a different tool. Same thing with dog training. You need to be a little persistent.
Yeah, absolutely.
To affect change, but that doesn't mean that plan B might not work as well. I don't know. That's sort of where my head went when we're talking about what you might be using, what you might have done, what you might have worked on with your dog to affect change, and how persistent you need to be. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about that for a minute.
Absolutely. And that's a fluid process too. I mean, it's not always black and white to know which direction to go to start making progress, which is why it's always nice to consult an expert. It's always nice to have somebody in your corner that can say, hey, look, based on history, based on what I read in your dog, based on what I think about your dog's temperament and tendencies, I think you should take this tactic. But I mean, basically, if you're working on your own, find credible advice. Don't go with the advice from your neighbor about his cousin's dog, because that's one sample size. And we definitely need to go with more when it comes to dogs, because they're all a little bit different. And we have many different tactics that we'll use to approach the same problem with a lot of dogs, just because of their natural inclinations. So we want to make sure that we're using those things to our advantage. And a lot of the times that is education that's just a little bit below the surface of what we all know about dogs in our society. Sometimes it's way below the surface of what we all know. But to get there, you need to be able to have some ideas to throw around, have an opportunity to try it with the dog. And of course, if it's not something that's going to do harm, it's always best to give it a shot and see where you get with it. Sometimes things will surprise you and they'll work out far better than you expected to. And sometimes you go in with this confidence knowing that, okay, this is a problem I've solved a million times before and it's a non-issue. And the dog humbles you quite a bit because they're different than what you were expecting. So it's always good to have a lot of information to tap into, and the advice from people who have been there, done that in more than just their singular situation will be very valuable for you.
I can think of a couple of people that I've talked to recently that have really struggled with teaching their dog to walk on a leash. And I think a lot of people that have COVID puppies, we were just talking with one of our people on our YouTube team earlier about the amount of people that are arriving to our videos or coming into our online training programs, like our life skills program for dogs over 5 months. It's online, but people are joining there and they have a puppy who was an amazingly well-behaved puppy, and now they've reached that adolescent phase, and they're really struggling, and there's all sorts of new challenges for those people. And number one, having a professional dog trainer who has been dealing with this for however many years is really helpful to get some insight and advice. But one thing I'm often seeing is people are over facing their dogs. So a good example is walking on leash. If you can't get out the door with just a little bit of attention, at the moment you step out into the sidewalk, maybe it's like onto your driveway, wherever that place is, if you lose the dog's focus at that point and you can't bring them back, you've lost that battle. You shouldn't go any further. And we talk a lot about teaching your dog to walk on leash and taking your dog for a walk are very different things. And getting a small win before you step out the door might be exactly what you need. And maybe that's all you work on in this training session. But if you were to step out the door, dog's pulling, you walk down your street, your laneway, through the lobby, wherever, you get outside, the dog's still pulling. And that's not the time to start trying to teach your dog to walk on a loose leash. The dog is overfaced with challenges, and your dog's not stubborn. They just don't know why. It's much less rewarding to check in with you. They don't know why they need to be walking in at your side, because it's a very unnatural thing for a dog to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about what you just described, where you open the door and you follow the dog out the door because your intention is to go for a walk, that is basically putting the dog in a situation where all the rewards that they're getting are for things that you won't want them to do, like pulling out the door and ignoring you and not being in tune with you on that walk. So here's the thing. If you want a responsive dog in those situations, you need to train in those situations. You can't expect a dog to offer you this glorious attention or a nice loose lead when they're on their own agenda. And this is basically the point of he doesn't want to listen. No, of course he doesn't in reality. And if you break it down where you take these phrases literally, of course he doesn't want to listen. He wants to sniff the ground. He wants to explore the environment. He wants to get to another location. That's why he's pulling. His innate wants are definitely going to be the opposite of your wants. So to be fair, we need to spend time teaching. And I'll tell you, when I have a puppy, I spend a lot of time training at my front door without going anywhere. First the door is closed and I'm doing response to name and I'm doing sits and little bits of emotional control, having that dog sit and just hold position for a minute at that front door while I maybe pick up a leash and then and reward the puppy. All of these lessons come really early with my puppies, and that's before I even open the front door. So I have already taught my puppy that it is valuable to focus on me in that area without anything really being a challenge in terms of the distractions in that location, because the door's not even open. Once I have done that, my puppy is a rock star with the door closed, and they can turn on their name quickly. They can tug with me. They can play. They can interact. They can do some simple tricks, and they can hold position for a few seconds for maybe, a paw wiping or something of that nature. Now I'm going to open the door and I'm going to do all the same behaviors. I want to make sure that if the door ever opens and I'm caught off guard and my puppy goes to run towards the open door, I want to make sure that he has practiced listening to his name, stopping and turning back towards me. I want to make sure I do that in training so that when it happens in real life, because there's two people living in my house, myself and my partner, I don't always know when he's coming or going. It's not always planned. Sometimes one of us opens the door to get the mail. I mean, there's a million opportunities for things to go wrong. And if you haven't put in the training time to teach the puppy what they should do instead of of what they want to do, then you are at a vulnerable position. So now the door's open. I'm working all these skills with my puppy, response to name, little bits of sit, tricks, basically teaching him how to focus on me, even though that front door is open. I do have a screen door in this situation, just so that, those of you listening can picture this. And then from there, I'll move out onto the front porch. I might open the screen door. I've always set myself up to make sure my puppy is going to be safe. So I've got a leash on, or I've got a long line on that's long enough that I can, without question, step on it should a squirrel appear, or, something tempting, before I've gotten enough of the training in. But doing this repetition with the front door open and out and on the front porch, teaching my puppy how to get into my side before I step out that door, how to walk nicely through the door. Those are all lessons that I am teaching in droves before I even attempt to go for a walk with my puppy.
I think a lot of people really, really underestimate the value of motion, of smells in the real world, in their environment. I think, we talk a lot about using food in training. It's a very specific reward, but we also teach people to use toys. We also teach people to use praise. We also teach people to use their own motion to supersede the value of external motion in the environment. I think that a lot of people don't really know that maybe they have a dog, and we were talking about breed specific excuses. Well, we know that there are some breed specific understandings you need to have to know that this breed of dog was bred to keep their nose on the ground, and their entire purpose was to follow scents and track stuff. So you're going to have to work a little bit harder at maintaining some of that attention on you, but naturally they want this. Just the act of smelling the ground might be rewarding enough that they don't care about your food. Yeah. And we'll get people that are saying like, oh, well, I don't want to reward my dog with treats because they don't want treats when I'm out in whatever. They've got their nose on the ground. Well, maybe that is the case, and maybe you need to switch how you can assign more value to you. It can be something as simple, changing direction and picking up the pace. I mean, it doesn't need to be a steak versus a tuna treat versus a kibble. It's not just about that, but understanding that your dog isn't being stubborn. They just don't see the value in you at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just means thinking outside the box a little bit from what you're doing in that moment and trying to find some way of bridging the gap and opening communication. So that might mean you are upping the value of your training treat. It might mean that you're changing the location a little bit as you teach those skills. So basically what we do with the McCann method is we try to bump the value of the skills that we're teaching so that the value that is innate desires from the dog become lessened. And they don't become lessened to the dog because they're not as important as they were. They become lessened to the dog because the thing that you're teaching is now more valuable and more important. And because of that, we really need to spend a lot of time on repetition and reinforcement. And I think that myself included, even with my own dogs now, we underestimate the amount of repetition that we need to get in for that to truly be valuable. And there are skills that I will revisit with my dogs as they get older because I think, you know what? I didn't do enough foundation work with that one. And now that we're at this different, physiologically, they hit different aging points and things are going to be important to them that weren't important before. So oftentimes we need to reassess. So you mentioned adolescence. We actually talked in depth. We did a deep dive on adolescence and how fun it was in our life skills online course last night for our Zoom lessons. And it can take you so by surprise when the things that you thought your dog was nailing suddenly fall apart. And a lot of the times that is a surprise for people that they go through these different growth stages and things are going to be important that weren't important before. And you're going to have a change in behavior. But that is a natural thing to occur with dogs. They're just like with kids, at the preschool age, they have different wants than they do when they're in high school. I mean, we have such a giant shift with young people in our society. We even segregate them by school and by situation so that we can teach to that physiological age. But with dogs, it seems like we jump right from the puppy is going to be the same throughout their entire life. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. So
I think there's something that, in that conversation, if we were to clip that statement, I think it might be lost or missed that we aren't basing all our training on a specific age. Although that needs to be taken into account, there's lots of situations where someone will get a rehomed dog or, get an adult dog for one reason or another, and that dog has never worked on a puppy skill like taking the collar. Maybe they have house training issues. While we do have a very specific, rather linear approach to our dog training, and it's kind of we start at about the 5-month mark. We start to do some of the more adult dog training stuff. Sometimes those adult dogs need to understand what yes means. Maybe they need to have a puppy skill like response to name, or, I think it is really important that you do have that solid foundation of puppy skills. It just makes your life a whole lot easier. Again, and those are really nice ways to teach your dog that you have some value, that it's worth listening to, that every time you say Spot or Rover or whatever, if you aren't very creative, that the dog will get a reward. But those controlled exercises are, maybe that's exactly where you need to start. Maybe you need to go do and refresh on some of those skills with your dog. If you feel like if you're blaming them and calling them stubborn. But I think it is, you made a really interesting point in your article, and I'm going to read it to our listeners because I really like it and it really makes sense to me. Let's see if I can find it here now. He said, dogs are not born wanting to listen any more than we are born wanting to work. When the sun is shining and the breeze is mild and the smells of spring flowers, my instincts tell me to get out there and enjoy it. They do not tell me to go to work so I can make money. And this is, if you can imagine yourself in this situation, it really gives you a better understanding of what your dog might be thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And always remembering, you were talking earlier about smells that we wouldn't be privy to. And this is something that I've actually captured on video to try to share with our online students. I have a video of Ned when we were at the park working on lining drills, and it's one of those pictures almost where his nose is pointing in a different direction than his eyes because he was sitting and watching and waiting for me to give instruction. But at the same time, his nose was twitching off to the bushes at the side of the park, and it was so obvious to me that at that stage in the game, he was ready for that challenge. But had he been a younger dog with less experience, he probably would have really struggled with that. And here's the thing. Our dogs aren't stubborn. They're really not. They're just preoccupied with their own innate desires. And we get to a point with training where they really want to do the right thing, when they realize how valuable it is to do. And if you've done your job and, you've built a good solid foundation, they have good value for the things that you want them to do, and they're ready to listen at that point. And they really do struggle when it comes to conflict in the environment, when there's a conflict of a distraction there that is trying to pull their attention. And of course, their natural instincts are wanting to kick in. In a natural world, Ned's nose would have been followed. He would have gotten up out of the sit in the middle of the park and he would have chased whatever that smell was and figured out what it was, whether it was something with potential fun or food or safety or fear. And he would have progressed from there. But the training makes him question that as a choice. And that can be a hard thing for them when they really want to do the right thing. So it's so important that there's that great history of values so they can override any feelings of frustration that might come along with wanting to chase that distraction, and then continuing to build a really good desire to listen to us and to actually want to listen.
It's fun watching some of the students, whether they're our in-class students or our online students, when you see that switch kind of flip in their dog's brain when they've worked, or maybe they've made the decision to be so consistent about whatever their expectations are. But you see a dog starting to make better choices, and they aren't necessarily, they aren't necessarily trained, things that the dog owner's trained already, but you think like, what a good dog. Sometimes it's even the dog's working so hard to be right that, and you're like, I can't believe the dog's right, even though that person's not giving them great information, but the dog is making good choices. And it's fun seeing that. Some dogs are easier to get to with that than others. Of course, we're not sitting here saying that changing your attitude is going to completely change your dog's behavior. What we're telling you is that you need to change your mind about how you look at this situation. You need to understand that giving your dog great information consistently is a good way to feel like you have a less stubborn dog. But it's all about how you view it, how you see it.
Honestly, as you're talking, all I can think in my head is you've got to give the dog wins.
Yeah.
This is how you build a dog that makes good choices and wants to make good choices. You help them figure out how to win, how to be right, and how to be right in a way that aligns with your views. So as we've talked about with the McCann method, our goal is always to set the dog up for success so that they can get that win. They can learn how to be right. And then once we've done our job teaching, we can sort of flip the script and we can put them in similar situations to what we've trained up to at that point, and we can test and we can look for a choice. But the caveat here is that you've got to be 99.9% sure that your dog is going to make the right choice. Otherwise, you're not ready for the test yet. Yeah. If you think 50-50, no, don't test. Don't test. Because if it goes wrong, then you have to come back from that and you're much better off to have it front end loaded right from the get-go. But help that dog figure out how to win so that listening is a joy. Have enough empathy for the dog that you try to see it from their perspective so that you can make it a win rather than, the frustration for both of us, where I'm frustrated because my dog's not doing what he wants. He's frustrated because he can't figure out what I want. And we're just misaligning and we're creating this relationship that doesn't have mutual trust and respect and, doesn't have a joy element to it.
People who are getting wins in their dog training are having a lot more fun. This is the thing. This was my turning point. I did not want to go to dog training. I felt like I didn't have the time. If there was I tried all the things. I tried all the different equipment. I actually had a dog trainer come to my house and I was like, I don't know what else to do. But the reason I'm sitting here talking to you guys on this podcast wearing a blue shirt is because I started to see these wins. And in fact, we talked with Instructor Robbie last week. Instructor Robbie was my first head instructor. Yeah. She was the person that got me to see those small wins. And it changed everything. It changed everything for Deegan, my black lab in training. It changed everything for me because once I started having a little bit more fun, then dog training wasn't a chore anymore, and I started to see that I was going to have the dog that I'd always wanted. I was going to be able to do more with her. And, I do need to mention, I think this is a good point to talk about it. Regardless of where you are in the world, you can see some of these small wins too. If you have a puppy in training, you're about to get a puppy, we have a Puppy Essentials program. And if you have a dog over 5 months and you're working on some of these skills, our life skills program is right for you. And you'll get to, talk with with a professional dog trainer. We have daily conversations on Facebook. We have coaching calls. The amount of support is nearly unlimited. It's really quite an amazing thing. It's exactly what I would have wanted if I were looking for dog training. And that's why it took us so long to get this thing launched. But I will tell you, all of the students in there, and I was listening to the coaching call last night, people are having fun because they're seeing success. Now, if things aren't going exactly as you want them to, at least you have a professional dog trainer that you can reach out to. This is a high touch opportunity. There's lots of opportunities to reach out to somebody and ask the question that you've been holding and thinking like, I don't know if I'll ever get this fixed. Now you have a professional dog trainer that you can talk to. So, it's a great opportunity, and join one of the thousands of students from the 50 countries all over the world that are with us every week. And you get to hear a little bit more of Instructor Shannon, more than just the podcast. And Instructor Kale, Instructor Steve, Instructor Carol, all those guys are in there. So check out the link in the description below, and join. I'd love to see you in our training classes. With that said, Shannon, this was a fun episode. I think this was a really good deep dive, and I hope we've convinced some people to stop saying that their dog is stubborn and understand that they can see change. They can achieve change if they really look at it just a little bit differently.
Yeah, figure out how to make them want to listen.
Absolutely. Go out there and get those small wins. On that note, I'm Ken.
I'm Shannon.
Happy training, guys. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the McCann Dogs podcast. And if you'd like some more training resources, be sure to check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at McCann Dogs. And if you'd like to train with us online, be sure to check out the show notes below for our My Dog Can online training program, where we know in just a few weeks your dog will become a well-behaved family member. Until then, happy training.